Spooky Pals. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Murder Murder News podcast, which also serves as a weekly meeting for our true crime cults. But don't worry, you've landed in the cult with all of the flower crowns and none of the flavor aid. We just love to sit around braiding each other's hair like Wednesday Addams and talk murder. In case you're just finding us now, allow us to introduce ourselves, your charismatic leaders. I'm Angelina, and I'm here with my creepy cohort, Aurora. How's it going?
I'm great. And hello out there to all those Wednesdays and Morticias.
Yeah.
We consider all of you who tune into our podcast each Friday to be honorary monsters. But if you'd like to make it official and join the MMN Commune for Real, you can sign up at patreon.com/murdermurdernews. How it works is you smash open your piggy banks and give us the little codes to your safety deposit boxes. Just kidding. Pledge us a couple of bucks a month, whatever you can spare, to show your support for what we do. And we'll show you how much we appreciate you by giving you a shout out on the show, sending you some murder merch, and naming an adorable baby goat in your honor. Best of all, you'll know you're helping us keep the show alive to keep those true crime lights on.
For our patrons, we just posted a new exclusive video episode this week about pseudocide, which is the art of faking one's own death. If you need to know more about pseudocide, join us today and you can watch that video as well as all of our other past exclusive episodes. There's some real gems in there that you don't want to miss. Now, let's take a look at some of the true crime stories that made headlines this week.
There have been some new developments in the murder case of Instagram influencer Alexis Sharkey. If you're with us for our YouTube show, This Week in True Crime, you may remember us reporting on the suspicious death of Alexis Sharkey in Houston, Texas, late last year. Her nude body was found on the side of the road by city workers, and it actually took 7 months for authorities to confirm that the cause of death was homicide. Alexis had moved to Houston just 1 year earlier with her new husband, Tom. And at the time of her murder, which was right around Thanksgiving, friends say Alexis was getting ready to serve Tom with divorce papers after enduring a history of domestic violence. Tom Sharkey played cat and mouse with authorities as he tried to throw them off his trail by identifying false suspects and moving from state to state as they tried to collect information and DNA evidence about Tom. Finally, just last month, police quietly obtained a warrant for Tom Sharkey's arrest. The investigation determined that Thomas Sharkey, her husband, is the only person who had the means, motive, and opportunity to have committed the murder, police said. They tracked Mr. Sharkey down to Fort Myers, Florida, where he was living with his daughter. As soon as Tom heard that they were going to arrest him, he ran upstairs, where he was soon found dead by self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Wow. What a wrap-up.
Wow. I definitely was not expecting that from him. Like, he seemed like the kind of narcissist that would just be on the run and on the run.
Yeah. I guess he ran out of places to run to.
Oof.
A cold case team led by former FBI agents and retired law enforcement officers called the Case Breakers say they may have finally found the true identity of the Zodiac Killer. The case of the Zodiac Killer, of course, is a 52-year-old mystery surrounding the murders of at least 5 people in the San Francisco Bay Area in the late 1960s. The killer taunted police with a series of letters bearing ciphers signed with his trademark crosshair symbol. The Case Breakers theory is based on several factors, including a 1969 police sketch of the Zodiac, anagrams that they say reveal their suspect's name, and they say they have proof that their suspect was responsible for the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, a case often theorized to be connected to the Zodiac Killer. The group has pointed to a man named Gary Francis Post, who actually died back in 2018. However, the FBI and police officials are not convinced, noting that the Zodiac case remains unsolved. Quote, "The Zodiac Killer case remains open," San Francisco FBI said in a statement, "and we have no new information to share at the moment." So we'll wait and see if that pans out to be anything, I guess.
Yeah, this is really an interesting one because I think like we all want closure. So there's like this hope that maybe this could be true and this could provide answers. But it
Yeah.
does sound like I was reading some different articles about it, that the police said that the murder that this group was tied him to, that they debunked that.
Yeah.
So I'd really like to hear from the FBI. I'd really like to hear from John Douglas, whom I follow on
Mhm.
Facebook. And he does like to weigh in on these cases and give his
Right.
thoughts.
Yeah, can't wait to hear what he has to say about it for sure. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, the Zodiac killer is like the case that I'm always like, hoping to be solved. I'm hoping to see it solved. And we're
Yeah.
like, of course, running out of time. Like, it figures if they are to find somebody that is possibly involved, they might be dead at this moment, like after so many years have passed. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I love a good story of like, I would say amateur sleuths, but I guess if they're
Yeah.
former FBI, they're not really that amateur, but it's,
Does sound like they knew what they're doing. Yeah.
yeah. Now, before we get into our story, we just want to say that while our tone is light in the intro, we do take the topics we're discussing very seriously. We are best buds and we love chatting together every week and turning it into a podcast. We want to share that passion with you and to create a vibe where all of you feel like our best buds too. We joke about us friends forming a cult or commune, but that's not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, which we do occasionally talk about in our weekly stories. We feel it's important to open up and talk about even the darkest aspects of humanity and the downright scary things that come up in the news. But we want to make it clear that our intention is never to sensationalize, and we always try to deliver these stories with respect to all parties involved or affected by the crimes we discuss.
We always post our sources in the episode description so you can do some digging on your own if a story we present piques your interest. But you should know that if you ever feel we get it wrong, either in our tone or in the details of the case, we want to hear about it. We are more than happy to make a correction or give an update on a case we've discussed in previous episodes. So feel free to reach out to us at murdermurdernews@gmail.com.
Some specific trigger warnings for this episode include serial killers, animal abuse, abduction, and suicide. If any of those are particularly sensitive subjects for you, you may want to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead. So, sticking with my tradition of starting right where we are, during this week in true crime history, on October 7th, 1988, Suzanne Rene Richerson disappeared just as she was finishing her shift working as a night clerk at Casa del Mar condominiums on Seawall Boulevard in Galveston, Texas. She was last seen by security guards at the resort during her shift around 6 a.m. Another resort employee, whose room was located right above Richerson's office, was awakened by the sound of a woman screaming. Next, they reported hearing a car door slam shut, followed by another scream and the sound of a car speeding away. Richerson's purse, school books, and car were left at the resort, and one shoe was found in the parking lot later that morning, but she was never seen again. Richerson preferred to go by her middle name, Renee. She was a good student. She had recently begun her senior year at Texas A&M University. She was studying maritime administration with plans to get a job in seaport management, and maybe even a degree in maritime law. She shared an off-campus apartment with her little brother in Galveston. Renee's friends were in awe of how she could work all night at the resort and still come into class the next morning, fresh-faced and well-prepared. Renee was kind but independent, and a lot of her friends looked up to her. So they were shocked to hear that Renee had been abducted and that police suspected foul play. Being that it was the 80s and that her abduction took place in Galveston, Richerson was immediately connected by authorities and media alike to a string of murders that has claimed the lives of dozens of women.
Since the early 1970s, a startling number of women have been abducted from around the same location along Interstate 45, which runs from Galveston all the way to Houston, Texas. The media has dubbed this trip America's Highway to Hell. Renee was abducted approximately 3 miles from where I-45 begins. Most of the bodies police have linked to disappearances around the I-45 have been found in a tract of land that has become known as killing fields. Also known as Calder Field, the killing fields are located off Calder Road in League City, Texas, which is about halfway between Houston and Galveston. The fields are situated about a mile away from I-45, and they run adjacent to the now out of commission Calder oil fields. Since the early 1970s, the bodies of 30 women and girls have been discovered in the so-called killing fields. Director Amy Cannon Mann, who made a dramatized film about the murders called Texas Killing Fields, described the location as such. You could actually see the refineries that are in the south end of League City. You could see the I-45, but if you yelled, no one would necessarily hear you. And if you ran, there wouldn't necessarily be anywhere to go. Some bodies were buried, or at least some attempt was made to disguise them, and some were just left out in the open air. Some of the bodies, like Rene's, have yet to be found. Still, investigators have associated a few unsolved missing person cases with the killing fields cases. What Rene had in common with the other victims was not just the location from which she was abducted. Many of the women and girls also looked a lot alike. Many were very pretty brunettes with long hair. And gosh, I just feel like in the 1970s, like it was just a death wish to have pretty brown hair, long brown hair.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Yeah. If you're a pretty girl with long hair, you
brown
just
hair.
shave
Dye
it
it,
off and
go red.
Yeah.
Get rid of it. Something,
Scare
maybe
those
a
creeps
nice,
away.
like bring in like a short hair trend, something like poor girls.
Yeah. So far, there's been nobody targeting like really weird looking shaved head girls.
Like a pixie
so maybe,
haircut.
Yeah, maybe I'm safe. Who knows?
Yes.
Probably not. There's someone for everyone, some
Right.
creep for everyone.
Well, spanning such a long time and with so many miles between some of the abductions, police don't imagine that all the victims share the same killer. But the FBI does believe that this may be the work of several serial killers. That is to say that within the large group of victims that police consider to be related to the Texas killing fields, there are smaller groupings of cases with more striking similarities between them.
Let's take a look at the list of victims and the commonalities between them. It would help to have some visuals to better understand the connections, especially if you're not familiar with Texas. So we'll link to some pages in the episode description that will show a map of the area and also photos of the victims. And we'll also include maps and photos in our Patreon newsletter that comes out today as well for any patrons that want to follow along. Things seem to have kicked off during the summer of 1971. In June, 13-year-old Colette Wilson was reported missing from County Road 99 and Highway 6 in Alvin, Texas, after she was dropped off by her band leader. In July 1971, 14-year-old Brenda Jones disappeared from Galveston on her way to visit her aunt. Her body was found the very next day in Galveston Bay near Pelican Island. 14-year-old Rhonda Johnson and 13-year-old Sharon Shaw were last seen walking together on Seawall Boulevard in Galveston, the same place that Rene Richerson disappeared from. Near the end of October 1971, 19-year-old Gloria Gonzalez was reported missing from Houston, Texas. Also from Houston, 12-year-old Allison Craven's mother reported her missing in early November 1971 from their apartment near I-45. Also that November, Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson, both 15, were last seen accepting a ride from a stranger after eating ice cream at a Galveston ice cream parlor. 2 days later, both girls' bodies were found bound and partially nude in Turner's Bayou. A little later in November 1971, the bodies of Colette Wilson and Gloria Gonzalez were found together near the Addicks Reservoir.
In January 1972, the bodies of Sharon Shaw and Rhonda Johnson were discovered in a marsh near Clear Lake. Rhonda's skull was found in Clear Lake. In February 1972, Allison Craven's remains were found in a pearland field about 10 miles from her home. In January 1973, 16-year-old Kimberly Pitchford disappeared from Dobie High School in Houston, where she had taken her driving test. Her body was discovered in a ditch just 2 days later. In September 1974, best friends Brooks Bracewell, who was 12 years old, and Georgia Greer, who was 14, were last seen at a convenience store off I-45 in Dickinson, Texas. In 1976, some remains were found in a ditch in Alvin, Texas, but due to police neglect, were not identified. Then in May of 1977, Susan Bowers disappeared. She was last seen walking in Galveston, Texas. Her skeletal remains were found 2 years later in Alta Loma.
In 1981, a new detective took over and re-examined the ditch in Alvin, Texas, where some unidentified remains were previously found. The new crew found even more remains and were able to identify that all the remains found in that ditch belonged to Georgia Greer and Brooks Bracewell. In June 1982, 15-year-old Michelle Garvey from Connecticut snuck out her bedroom window and is believed to have hitchhiked towards Texas. Her remains were found just hours later, but were not identified until 2014 when a web sleuth user suggested the match. Early October 1983, 23-year-old cocktail waitress Heidi Fye disappeared from a convenience store in League City, Texas. Late October 1983, 14-year-old Sandra Ramber was determined to be missing after her home was found with the front door wide open, her purse and coat still inside the house, and food in the oven, with no sign of Sandra. Like Rene Richerson, Sandra's remains have yet to be discovered. In spring of '84, a League City dog came home carrying a human skull. The skull was found to belong to missing Heidi Fye. A search of Calder Field uncovered the rest of her remains.
In September 1984, 16-year-old Laura Miller was reported missing after she was last seen at the exact convenience store where Heidi Fye was last seen. Remember the name Laura Miller because the search for her body and her parents' quest for justice for Laura has been instrumental in putting the pieces together to connect the Killing Fields victims and in naming and investigating possible suspects. Human remains were uncovered in Calder Field in February of 1986 that couldn't immediately be identified. Coroners estimated the victim to be a woman between the ages of 22 and 30, who had been between 5'5" and 5 inches tall. There was a small caliber gunshot wound on her back, and it was estimated that she had died about 6 months before her body was found. She was recorded at the time as a Jane Doe. Next, we have 19-year-old Shelley Sykes, who was last seen leaving her job as a waitress at a beachfront restaurant in Galveston in May of 1986. The next day, her car was found stuck in the mud on the side of I-45 access road, stained with blood. The next disappearance connected to the Texas killing fields was Renee's in October of 1986. Then, in September of 1991, another unidentified body was discovered and labeled Janet Doe. Coroners estimate the victim to be between the ages of 24 and 34 and just over 5 feet tall. She likely died at least 6 weeks and as much as several months before her body was found. 14-year-old Lynette Bibbs and 15-year-old Tamara Fisher were last seen at a teen club in Houston with a 22-year-old male companion. I don't know what a teen club is, but that sounds very creepy.
It's like a nightclub without alcohol, I guess.
Where they're letting
why are 22-year-olds going? That's weird.
That's very creepy.
That shouldn't be allowed. Mm-hmm.
The guy claims to have dropped the girls off at a motel in Old Spanish Trail in Houston. Their bodies were found just a couple of days later on the side of a dirt road near Cleveland, Texas. Both had been shot to death.
The Killing Fields story got a bit of star power as 13-year-old Crystal Jean Baker disappeared from her grandmother's home in Texas City after an argument. Crystal's great-aunt was Norma Jean Baker, more commonly known as Marilyn Monroe. Crystal was last seen using a payphone at a convenience store, and her body was found just 2 hours later, dumped over the Trinity River Bridge. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. We have already named so many victims, and of course, each and every one of them matters, and all of them deserve justice. But because of Crystal's famous aunt, her case got a lot more hype. Especially if you're advocating for a victim who isn't getting the attention that they deserve, it can be easy to see this as a negative thing. Why is Crystal getting all the attention when many of the other girls have been largely ignored? But let me tell you why it's always a positive thing when a murder case gets attention, and one case generating hype can actually have a positive impact on all the other cases out there. Firstly, as you can imagine, with something as big as the Texas killing fields, any search that goes on might turn up other bodies or new discoveries in any of the associated cases. And no matter which victim's story resonates most with you, any talk about any of these cases keeps the Killing Fields story alive, and puts pressure on authorities to keep investigating. But one amazing thing to note about Crystal's case is that it convinced Governor Greg Abbott to sign the Crystal Jean Baker Act in 2019, which permits the collection of DNA from individuals arrested for certain felonies prior to conviction. This move will make investigations quicker and easier for countless criminal cases to come.
Well, that is the first useful thing Greg Abbott has ever done.
Yeah,
As a
possibly
Texan,
the
I'm
only.
allowed to say that. Yes.
Yes.
In 1997, 12-year-old aspiring ballerina Laura Smither disappeared while jogging near her home in Friendswood, Texas. Her body was found later that month in a retention pond in Pasadena, Texas. Laura Smither's parents founded a nonprofit organization called the Laura Recovery Center in 1998, which aids in the search and recovery of kidnapping victims. Also in 1997, 17-year-old Jessica Kane went missing after shopping with some friends at the Baybrook Mall in Clear Lake, Texas. Her truck was found abandoned along I-45. A little outside the typical profile, but still considered related by authorities, 57-year-old Tot Harriman went missing from League City in 2001. She was last seen driving her Lincoln Continental along Highway 35 in search of a new home. Neither Tot nor her car were ever seen again. 23-year-old Sarah Trusty was last seen riding her bicycle near the Algoa Baptist Church in July of 2002. The next day, her bike was found in the church foyer. 2 weeks later, her body was found by fishermen in the Texas City Dike. The last victim listed as related to the Texas killing fields is Teresa Venegas, who was last seen walking near Green Cay subdivision in Dickinson, Texas on Halloween night in 2006. Her body was found 3 days later in a field across from Dickinson High School. She had been raped and strangled to death, and her hair had been cut. 19 years after Jessica Kane first went missing, her body was found in a field near William P. Hobby Airport in Houston in March 2016. In 2019, bodies previously labeled Jane Doe and Jana Doe were identified using genetic genealogy and family tree DNA. Jane Doe was 30-year-old Audrey Cook of Galveston, and Jana Doe was 34-year-old Donna Prudhomme.
As you can see, things have been slowing down, but murders and suspicious disappearances continue to be investigated to this day. The biggest roadblock in most of these cases was the time it took for police to actually begin investigating. With most victims being young women and teenagers, authorities were often quick to assume that the victim had just run away or was out drinking or doing drugs with friends, rather than to actually take the missing person report seriously and promptly begin searching. For this reason, family involvement and advocacy have been crucial in these investigations. We've talked about the Crystal Jean Baker Act and the Laura Recovery Center, but another major player has been Tim Miller, Laura Miller's father. Laura Miller's life changed when she began experiencing seizures. She had been a popular straight-A student, but with the seizures, she became depressed, began hanging out with a bad crowd, and even made a suicide attempt. When she disappeared, police first assumed she was a runaway. When Laura's remains were first buried, it turned out to only be part of her remains, with the rest still scattered around Calder Field. Tim Miller sued the county and insisted that the grave be exhumed so the remains could be buried all together. Buried a second time, it was discovered all of the remains didn't belong to Laura. There were some extra ribs in her casket, which were ultimately determined to belong to the body of Audrey Cook, another Killing Fields victim. Tim again sued the county and asked that the remains be dug up again and properly buried once and for all. Inspired by Laura's case, Tim Miller created EcuSearch, an organization that has now been in operation for about 30 years, which has assisted with hundreds of missing persons cases and located more than 400 living people and 238 bodies. Miller has also identified possible suspects all on his own and has stepped outside the law to threaten the man that he felt was responsible for his daughter's murder at gunpoint. He has also led illegal searches of the suspect's property. He even convinced the owner of the old Calder oil field to rent the land to him for $10 a year so that he could conduct his own digs. At one point, he dug up an entire woman's outfit and purse with no body. this discovery has so far been considered inconsequential. It's bits of info like that that lead me to believe that there may be a lot more killing fields victims than we are aware of.
Yeah, seriously, that's very
Mm.
creepy.
Mm.
All right, so now let's explore some of the suspects. Edward Howard Bell was known as an exhibitionist who had flashed children on at least a dozen occasions, but had managed to evade imprisonment. In 1978, Bell murdered former Marine Larry Dickens when he tried to intercept while Bell was masturbating in front of a group of teenage girls on the beach. Super creepy.
Yeah.
After the murder, Edward Bell fled to Panama. He was extradited back to the States and jailed for Dickens' murder over 2 decades later in 1994. While in custody, Bell confessed to the murders of 11 girls. He said he couldn't remember most of their names, but he was certain that he had killed Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson, who he actually knew because he owned a surf shop the girls frequented. He was also sure he had killed Colette Wilson and Kimberly Pitchford. And he described 2 more girls who sounded just like Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw. Unfortunately, Bell was never charged with any of the murders because there was absolutely no evidence to incriminate him. With all that Bell knew, it certainly does seem like he was responsible for some of the murders, but one can never be sure if there are other factors motivating suspects to confess. Sometimes confessing to additional crimes while on trial for other crimes can help the suspect negotiate a plea deal. Sometimes creeps just like the glory of being credited for gruesome murders that they may have had nothing to do with. That's why it's important to thoroughly investigate each suspect and each individual case so we don't stop looking and let the real killers slip through the cracks of the justice system. When we mistakenly believe that the perpetrator is behind bars, the true killer can walk free and may even kill again.
For a short while, investigators even thought that confession killer Henry Lee Lucas may have been involved in the killings, but that idea was eventually put to rest. Michael Lloyd Self was a gas station attendant and convicted sex offender from Galveston. Self was interrogated as a suspect in the murders of Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw, and he confessed. He later retracted his confession, stating that he was tortured into confessing by police. He said he had been suffocated with a plastic bag, burned with cigarettes, and assaulted.
Wow.
Yeah. Despite the fact that there were some discrepancies in his confession with regards to what the victims were wearing, how they were killed, and where the bodies were found, Michael Self was sentenced to life in prison in 1974. In 1976, Police Chief Don Morris and Deputy Tommy Deal were convicted of torture and misconduct against detainees. Michael Self has repeatedly applied for an appeal, but he's been turned down every time. Self died in prison in 2000. Understandably, a number of police officials and the district attorney have stated that they feel Self was wrongly convicted, so Rhonda and Sharon's real killer is still a mystery.
While already in prison for the kidnapping and attempted murder of exotic dancer Sandra Sepa, William Louis Reese's DNA was tested to reveal that he was responsible for another murder, that of Tiffany Johnson, who took place in Oklahoma in 1997. Once the ball was already rolling and police were in the swing of adding charges to Reese's rap sheet, he started confessing to additional murders. He confessed to killing Jessica Kane and Kelly Cox, both in 1997, which was confirmed as he led investigators to the locations of their bodies. Of all of Reese's confessed abductions and murders, Jessica Kane is the only one listed as being associated with the Texas killing fields. But in fact, it looks like William Reese is one of several serial killers police have been seeking in connection with the killing fields. After taking a closer look at Reese's other crimes, I wonder why his other victims haven't been listed as killing fields victims. 19-year-old Sandra Sepa was abducted after using a payphone at a gas station in Webster, Texas. She escaped after jumping out of Reese's vehicle as he drove down I-45. Tiffany Johnson may not have come from Texas, but she was from nearby Oklahoma. And with Michelle Garvey being from Connecticut, it doesn't seem like the victims necessarily have to have hailed from Texas in order to be considered affiliated with the Killing Fields murders. Kelly Ann Cox was 20 years old, and she disappeared after a school field trip to Denton County Jail. She was a student at University of North Texas. She was last seen using a payphone at the 7-Eleven across the street from the jail. Kelly's abduction took place quite a ways north of I-45, but when Reese led investigators to her body, it was located in Brazoria County, a desolate area just outside of Houston. William Reese has also been accused of the murder of Laura Smither, which at first he denied, but later he did add Smither's name to the list of murders he confessed to have committed. All of the aforementioned abductions and murders that are associated with Reese took place in 1997. Quote, he was incredibly prolific, Laura's mother, Gay Smither, told News 9. She continued, 1997 was the worst year for young women between Houston and Oklahoma City, and there's lots more girls out there that need to be found. Victims' families waited until this past summer to see Williams Reese stand trial. Oklahoma County District Judge Susan Stallings spoke when she announced Reese's sentence. There's an old saying in the law, justice delayed is justice denied. Justice will not be delayed any longer in this case. I sentence you to death. Laura Smither's parents traveled to Oklahoma for the trial. Gay Smither told Click 2 Houston, in many ways, it was a trial for Tiffany, but it was a trial for all the Texas girls as well, and I'm really glad I was here for it. William Reese has only been convicted in 2 cases so far, that is Sandra Sepa and Tiffany Johnson. Interesting side note, Sandra Sepa blocked out the traumatic experience of being abducted and was hypnotized in order to remember the details of her attack for the trial. Authorities are still deciding whether to extradite Reese to Texas to stand trial for the other murders. But the families of the Texas victims are satisfied enough to learn that William Reese will never walk free and won't be able to hurt anyone else.
The man who Tim Miller threatened at gunpoint, whose land Miller led unsanctioned searches on, was Robert Abel. Abel ran the Starlight Trail rides on the land that ran adjacent to Calder Field after he retired from his position as an engineer at NASA. Abel may have been an evil genius masquerading as a simple farm boy. He seemed friendly and forthcoming and very eager to help with the investigation in any way he could. Authorities couldn't figure out whether the help that Abel offered was genuine or just a distraction from any real clues that could have been uncovered. He seemed calm and collected until authorities began receiving calls from Robert's ex-wives, of which he has several. A few described Abel's fits of anger. One woman, to whom Robert was only married for a brief 41 days, claims to have left after her new husband warned, "If you ever deny me sex again, I will kill you." Yeah. A couple of his ex-wives said Robert had never actually physically abused them, but that he did have a habit of beating his horses when he got angry, occasionally even hitting them with chains and pipes. The women also mentioned that if one of Abel's trail horses happened to pass away, he wouldn't bury or dispose of their remains. He would just leave the bodies out in the open air to, quote, let the scavengers get them.
Ugh.
Confronted about the animal abuse, Abel denied it, saying the horses would never cooperate with him and would certainly show more fear of humans if he had mistreated them. Robert's ex-wives talked about his collection of nude photographs of women, but only a couple of these photographs were ever found, and there didn't seem to be anything suspicious about them. None of the searches carried out on Abel's property, legal or otherwise, ever uncovered any evidence implicating him in any of the murders. So, of course, Robert Abel was never considered anything other than a person of interest. Robert Abel tried to sue the county for slander, but he soon learned that you can't actually sue someone for naming you as a person of interest in a crime that you may have committed. According to the detective's affidavit, there is little doubt that a single person was responsible for the murders of Laura Miller, Heidi Fye, Audrey Cook, and Donna Prudhomme. All 4 bodies were found nude under a tree with their hands clasped. Detectives fully expected to find trophies from the 4 murders inside the home of Robert Abel, but again, no such trophy was ever found. Abel claimed that his reputation and his trail ride business alike were utterly demolished during the investigation. In 2005, Robert Abel drove his ATV out to the railroad tracks, stopped and waited for the train to arrive, and completed suicide. So, unfortunately, we will never know if Abel ever had any involvement in any of the cases connected to the killing fields. And it's sad to imagine Abel's life was lost as a casualty of the investigation if he truly was innocent. It's a sticky situation because it can be difficult to tell when to back down on a gut feeling while investigating a string of murders.
In retrospect, Tim Miller says he no longer believes that Robert Abel killed his daughter. He now points to Clyde Hedrick, a former neighbor to the Millers. In 2016, Hedrick was found guilty of the manslaughter of Ellen Ray Beeson, who was last seen at a nightclub in Leak City in July of 1974. At the trial, the state of Texas produced a notice of intent to process a number of past crimes that Clyde Hedrick had committed, including enticing a child, criminal trespass, driving while intoxicated, terrorist threat, evading arrest, assault possession of a controlled substance, theft, abuse of a corpse, criminal mischief, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, attempted arson, and assault and battery. That is quite a list.
Yeah.
He sounds pretty terrible, and Clyde's ex-wife shared that in the 80s, he would often come home having changed his clothes from what he went out in, saying, "I did it again." So there's no doubt that Clyde Hedrick is a criminal. Serial killer we're not so sure of. But Tim Miller is pleased nonetheless to see Hedrick sentenced for a 30-year-old crime. He says it gives him hope that this isn't over, and in fact, it's still just the beginning. And he feels confident that he will eventually see justice for his daughter, Laura.
Suspect Mark Stallings was actually employed by Robert Abel, working on the land in Calderfield in the 80s. Stallings was already a convicted kidnapper, serving a life term in jail in 2013 when he confessed to having murdered a woman and dumped her body in Calderfield back in 1991. That woman was later identified as Donna Prudhomme. Mark Stallings is also suspected to have murdered Audrey Cook and two other women who are not considered Killingfields murders. There were plans to investigate DNA evidence and attempt to link Mark Stallings to the four similar murders which took place in the 90s, but that doesn't seem to have ever panned out, and we're not sure why. Stepping into speculation corner for a sec, word on the internet has it that law enforcement has decided not to pursue Stallings in the Killingfields murders because he is already serving a 486-year prison sentence, and further trials would just be a waste of taxpayers' money.
Well, and not so sure about that. I think people would like answers.
Yes.
In 2012, Kevin Edison Smith was found guilty of the murder of Crystal Jean Baker. A DNA match was confirmed with evidence collected from Baker's dress. El Paso police received a phone call from John Robert King in 1987, who confessed that he and his friend Gerald Peters Varst had kidnapped, raped, and strangled Shelley Sykes, leaving her body in Calderfield. Both men were told they could avoid a life sentence by assisting the police in finding Shelley's body. Neither man was able to give correct directions for investigators to uncover Shelley's body. Both were convicted of aggravated kidnapping and given life sentences, but neither was officially charged in relation to any of the Killingfields crimes. Kings died in prison of natural causes in 2015, and Svarst is still incarcerated.
That's it. That's all we got. And while it may sound like quite a lot, there are still so many holes in the big picture of the Texas Killingfields. As usual, the best way that you can help to ensure that justice is served is to share this story and to never stop talking about it. You can also donate to groups like EcuSearch and the Laura Recovery Center. If you live in or around Texas and you know anything that might be of value to the investigation, which is still very much an active investigation, you can visit tips.fbi.gov or you can contact your local FBI field office. FBI Houston can be reached at 713-693-5000.
All right. That was a big one. I can't believe I have never heard of any of this being
like how huge is
a Texan, a former Texan.
Yeah. And like I spent a lot of time on like Google satellite and Street View looking at this field and what's around it, and it's super creepy.
Okay,
I just can't imagine that
right after this. Maybe we'll post some pictures.
Oh, yeah. And when people start like dumping bodies there in the 70s, instead of like, I don't know, watching the area, putting up some surveillance, performing regular checks, they just like let it keep being a dumping ground for 30 years.
Especially with it being so common. Why is nobody ever watching this? And I don't know what security cameras were like during this era, but you would think at least by the 90s, like some of these are from 97 and like in 2002 that like, there would be some technology that could be used here.
Even without technology, it's like in the early days, they could have at least put someone, say, on patrol to like roll by and check it out once in a while, you know? Just like, I don't know. There seems to be a way to stop it when something is like a very clear pattern, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So weird. Do you have any creepy TV recommendations this week? I know you were talking about watching Midnight Mass. Everyone's been talking about this. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. I started it last week and I think I've watched 3 episodes. We did make a post about this on TikTok, so feel free to go check that out and kind of join the conversation. It was not the right pace for me. I really enjoyed The Haunting of Bly Manor and The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. I thought they were really fantastic, and the show's done by the same show creator and writer. But it's really kind of slow. Like, I'm in the 3rd episode and there's maybe like a monster going on. We don't know, but like there's not a lot going on other than mysterious animal deaths, which is like the worst thing I could imagine. I just can't. I just cannot with animal deaths.
Yeah, we don't like that. And it's difficult sometimes, like when you're watching TV with your animals even. Like I noted that when I was watching... what was that show called again with the witches? Oh, Brand New Cherry Flavor. When I was watching that, because there was a lot of cat deaths right from the beginning, and at the very beginning when like a cat was run over, it sucked because my cat was sitting on my lap facing the TV. And when she saw a cat on screen, she got all like intrigued and she sat up and she was like looking at the cat and she was really watching. And then when I saw that a car was heading straight for the cat, I tried to cover my cat's eyes and she tried to look around my hands. I was like, no, you don't want to watch a cat die on TV.
No.
So like that was upsetting. But
so upsetting.
I would like if at least these kinds of deaths, animal deaths, pet deaths, could happen off screen, you know, so that we don't even have any sort of visual associated with it.
I agree. I never want to see it. It's the worst thing for me. And I just, after the second one and the second episode, I was like, I don't think I can do it. So I haven't continued watching. I don't know. Let us know if we should watch it, if it's worth it. But I got kind of mixed answers on TikTok. Like most seem to say keep watching, but nobody would confirm whether or not there's more animal deaths. And I just can't do it if there's one more. Like,
somebody please confirm. We don't want to see any more than what Aurora's already seen for sure. And but everyone is talking about this, so I mean, I'm kind of curious. But let's find out if it's worth it. Let's get some more comments.
If you watch it, let me know.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
I haven't watched anything cool, but I have been like building my list, you know. I saw new on Netflix, there's a movie called Bad Sport. It's the tagline says where true crime and sports intersect. So it's all like the sort of true crime stories that went on behind the scenes with like sports teams and like pro wrestlers and like things like that, which is really the only interest I have in sports at all. So I'm there to watch it for the true crime for sure.
Nice.
I've also been getting ready for some, just light, spooky, Halloween-y watching. And I've been looking at stuff like there's a thing called Night Books, also on Netflix, which is PG. I usually don't put on a lot of PG stuff, but it looks like a good, fluffy, like PG spooky watch. And it says it's produced by Sam Raimi, which he worked on the Evil Dead series, of course. So like it could be great. The plot says that the lead kid must tell a scary story every night, or he'll be trapped in a witch's apartment forever.
Is it kind of like Are You Afraid of the Dark kind of thing?
Yeah, it has that kind of vibe I see from
that's one of my all-time favorite TV shows from like Nickelodeon when I was a kid. So, and I love PG because I'm a baby.
Honestly, spooky storytelling is spectacular. And actually, if it's PG, I feel they have to get a little more creative, you know? to be spooky without like
Agreed.
any of the
Without
classic
gore
tropes.
and like cheap shock value. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna check that out, and maybe we'll talk about that on TikTok this week. So I've been looking for
Yeah.
something to
Nice.
to like engage about. So I'm gonna check that out.
Excellent. All right. So, do you have any other stuff you've been watching, or any other stuff you've thought of mentioning?
The only other thing that I started to watch but I haven't finished is Squid Games, which is the Korean horror show. Have you heard about
I've
this?
heard a lot about that too. I haven't seen it.
It seems really interesting. Yeah. And I watched maybe like the first 10 minutes, and I was watching it with my husband who works in visual effects. So this man makes monsters for a living, and he makes bloody effects and gore and like headshot wounds and just, like the most disgusting things. Like I'll walk by his computer when he's actually working on post and something, and it's like a leaky bullet wound or like something really gross.
Yeah.
And we started watching it, and the first 10 minutes in, this is an incredibly minor spoiler, but there was like, so if you haven't started watching it, you don't want to hear this. I don't think it gives away anything, but cover your ears.
Yeah.
And like a guy like sticks a knife up like another guy's nostril, like he's going to cut it.
Disgusting.
Yeah. It is really very like threatening. And I understand why he didn't want to look, but he had to turn it off. And it's like, it was too much for him, but I want to keep watching. But we've just been like stuck in a hotel room together. And if we're watching something, we're watching it together. So I want to revisit it when he gets out of my personal space at some point.
That sounds like a good plan.
Yes, whenever that is, I will revisit that show.
I wish you luck, because it sounds nice to like get your own personal space and like a little TV time.
God, amazing. I can't wait.
You've been having clearly a lot of adventures, which looks like lots of fun, but like,
the best time, but sometimes even the closest couples could use a few feet apart.
I think everybody needs a little time apart. That's like the secret ingredient for like the best relationships. It's like a little time apart.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's enough murder for 1 week. If you require even more murder, of course, you can always find us on the OG murder.news, where you'll find the latest breaking true crime news articles posted all week long.
You can find us on Instagram, where we've posted a list of scary Halloween movies to marathon this year, and that's at Murder News. On Twitter at Murder News, where we posted a cheeky meme about Spirit Halloween taking over Facebook after this week's very powerful outage.
I kind of wish that lasted, to be honest.
Yeah, it felt nice and horrible and very boring.
Yes, like most things these days.
And on TikTok at Murder News, where we're sharing our favorite creepy pastas with you this month in honor of spooky season.
So much fun.
And you can also find us on our Facebook page by searching for Murder News.
And for you diehard monsters, you will also want to join our Facebook group, which you can also find by searching Murder News. You'll want to join so that you never miss a book club meeting, and so that you'll be among the first to hear new announcements about any upcoming virtual events, like the Zoom Halloween party that we're throwing just for you. Have an amazing week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, true crime friends.
Bye.